I want to yield to the remainder of my time to Mr. Rooney, who chairs the NSA and Cyber Subcommittee. Chairman Rooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the Chairman mentioned, this bill reauthorizes FISA Section 702, which is a critical intelligence gathering program targeting foreigners located overseas. This legislation was carefully crafted based on our committee's extensive outreach to members of the House, the Senate, and the administration over the last 2 years. We provided information sessions both on the Hill and at the NSA. We've also reached out to the member-to-member level to discuss the authorities and protections related to Section 702 that are currently in place. H.R. 4478 strengthens our national security by adding an emergency provision to FISA Section 705. The bill also adds a new foreign power to FISA covering international malicious cyber actors that threaten our national security. This bill also makes key privacy reforms, including restrictions on the use of FISA Section 702 against U.S. people in criminal prosecutions, codification of unmasking procedures, enhancements to the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, and various new congressional reporting requirements. These privacy protections strengthen congressional oversight of the IC, as well as transparency of FISA Section 702, without any operational impact to the program. This is an ideal outcome given the effectiveness of FISA Section 702 in U.S. counterterrorism efforts. Most important, this bill reauthorizes FISA Section 702 for 4 years, which ensures the continued use of this critical program in protecting U.S. national security. As the chairman of the NSA and Cyber Subcommittee, I'm keenly aware of the responsibility we have to have the American people to ensure the intelligence community has the tools it needs to keep America safe. I can vouch for the importance of this bill, and I hope you will support it. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rooney. I'll now yield to Ranking Member Schiff for any opening comments he would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to take this opportunity to address my colleagues in the hope that we can change this hearing from the path that it's on at the moment, which is to a party line vote on this proposal, and see if we can still produce a almost completely bipartisan work product. What we had suggested when we engaged in the early discussions over the bill was a way of resolving the most difficult issue around 702, and that is, how should we deal with queries of the database that's created by 702? 702, as we all know, is a program that has been enormously important to the intelligence community and law enforcement. It targets foreigners on foreign soil, but there are times when we target foreigners on foreign soil where information, because a foreigner is talking about an American or talking to an American, is nonetheless captured within the database. And so the question is, under what circumstances should law enforcement be able to query that database that may contain some information about Americans? Should there always be a warrant requirement? Should there be a warrant requirement under certain circumstances? And how do we make sure this database just doesn't become a vehicle for fishing expeditions? And what we proposed and what we arrived at, I think, was a sensible conclusion that built on what the Judiciary Committee put together, but did so in a way that was more operationally viable. And that is, we would allow queries of the database, but in cases of criminal matters not involving national security or serious violent crimes, we would require there be a warrant or the evidence could not be used in court. That, I think, is a workable construct for the intelligence community. It also addresses the gravamen of the privacy concerns that we not have this large and growing database that includes information about Americans that could be used just to fish for evidence of a tax crime or a fraud. That language is now in the bill, as well as other privacy protections we've added to the bill, and I think we have fairly broad agreement on that. What we do not have broad or even any bipartisan agreement on, however, is the unmasking language in the bill. As the members are aware, from the extensive time we've spent on this issue, we've uncovered not a scintilla of evidence that there was ever any improper unmasking of anything in the 702 program. So the unmasking issue, to the degree that it exists at all, does not exist with respect to the 702 program that we have been able to see. For that reason, this language is not only unnecessary, but in our view is simply an effort to politicize the 702 bill and to further a political narrative. And for that reason, of course, we can't support it. And I'm sure if the shoe was on the other foot and we were offering language in this bill, and we could have offered language in this bill to make a point on collusion if we wanted to. And you would have said, that's politicizing the bill, we're not going to include your language on collusion. But we haven't sought to do that. This is too important a program. And what we'd ask you to do is not to do the same. Let's not mix up the unmasking stuff, which has nothing to do with this program, and defeat what is otherwise a very bipartisan work product. Because I can tell you what the result will be if we go forward with the way we are now teed up to go forward, and that is we'll have a party line on this vote on this bill. It will go nowhere. The judiciary bill will go nowhere either, and we will have completely abdicated to the Senate. And the Senate will cobble together whatever they will, and they will attach it to a must-pass legislation at the end of the year, and all our efforts will be for naught. And I would rather see us not abdicate in that way, and I would just urge that we come to agreement. We offered a compromise even on the unmasking legislation language, which we don't think belongs in here at all, but we did offer at least a compromise. But I would urge that we reconsider this and not simply go forward with one or two party line votes. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Other members wish to be heard. Mr. Conaway.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I find my good friend's arguments to be less than persuasive. Whether there's any evidence of wrongdoing or not, Americans' personal identity should be protected, and what we are trying to do with this unmasking provision is just to make sure that that happens. We have seen instances in the record that we've been collecting so far where appears to be perhaps reckless or certainly an inordinate number of unmaskings of American identity. And without good proof, without establishing why, the analyst or whoever was asking for the unmask to happen, and to hear the argument that we should be less concerned about the privacy of Americans than what this attempts to do is pretty shocking, quite frankly. This does not hamper the ability of the intelligence community to use this tool. It just simply protects Americans' identities, those Americans whose identities should be protected, and there should be a really high bar to cross in order to unmask someone's identity from a collection tool that has not gone through the normal privacy protections of the Fourth Amendment that we are afforded across everything else. So this tool is too important to not put in place, but by the same token, it's powerful. And its power can be used inappropriately, whether that's the case or not. We need these audit procedures to be able to understand who's been unmasked over what period of time. We need these procedures to make sure that future transitional administrations, either coming in or leaving, or the particularly leaving administration, doesn't misuse this. And just because we don't have, as you said, a scintilla, which I think is a bit of a stretch of evidence, nevertheless, this is important protections for the American public to be able to say, okay, we'll trust the intel agencies with this tool, but we also want to make sure that Americans are treated fairly and that their confidentiality is protected in all instances where that's the case. If an American is involved in some wrongdoing, there's ways to get that identity known to the people who should know it. But if it's simply the local pizza man that was being called to deliver pizza, his or her identity should never be unmasked, and ought to be confident that that's the case. So I'm really concerned with the line of logic that my good colleague has put forth as to why this should not be in here. It should be in here. And if we're going to gain the broad support of the American public on maintaining the use of this tool, I think being able to look at them and say, we're going to require that whoever gets unmasked, that's tracked, require the ability for Congress to have an immediate oversight, and all the other things that this does not hinder anything in any way, and I don't think is a politicalization of anything but just good governance and a protection of American privacy. So I'm fully supportive of what we've done so far, and would hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle would see the wisdom of protecting Americans' privacy. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Conaway. Mr. Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked for time really in a state of mind of real sadness. Sadness really because I love this committee's work, and I like every single member, and I like what we do because what we do is really important. We are the only people really who oversee a roughly $80 billion operation which does essential, critical, and important things, dangerous things, controversial things. And theoretically, we could have had a really good debate and conversation about a controversial program that we all understand is critical, but we all understand at its heart gets to the terms on which the government gets to go through the private communications of American citizens. And I'm sad because historically this committee has operated in a bipartisan way. Instead, where we are today is a bill that was presented to us about 36 hours ago, a bill that has had exactly 0 hearings associated with it. And as much as I like and respect the chairman of the NSA and Cybersecurity Subcommittee, I consider him a friend, I'm the ranking member of that subcommittee, NSA Cybersecurity Subcommittee. My friend said there had been extensive outreach. I'm the ranking member of the NSA and Cybersecurity Subcommittee. I've been invited to 0 hearings on 702. I've been asked for 0 opinions on 702 in that subcommittee. We have had no discussions about this. I offered my friend, the chairman, a letter with some thoughts on 702, hoping to start that conversation, and I received no response. We've had not one hearing on this topic. We saw this bill for the first time 36 hours ago. We haven't even talked about it within the Democratic caucus. So what could have been a process around one of the most essential things we do is now going to be scuppered by a nakedly political continuation of the unmasking issue. We all know where it came from. The president, in one of his early morning tweets, accused Barack Obama of wiretapping him, double P, in Trump Tower. And since that tweet, my friends on the other side have been engaged in a feverish attempt to justify that tweet. Now, let's be clear. I've looked at every single unmasking. I've sat in every hearing. Sam Powers, Susan Rice, people who are casually accused of violating the rights of American citizens. I sat in every one of those hearings through the whole hearing. I've looked at every single unmasking. There is not a shred of evidence that there was an illegal unmasking. Now, that doesn't mean that we couldn't tighten up the process. I think we could. I have looked at that process. It should be better documented. I would love to have that conversation. But let's not kid ourselves about what's happening this morning. What's happening this morning, and I say this with great sadness, is an attempt to feed the beast of this idea that Barack Obama's administration officials illegally unmasked American citizen information. Let's have a hearing about that. Let's at least talk about it. No, we're not going to do that. Instead, we are going to scupper an essential conversation about the terms on which the federal government gets to look at the private communications of American citizens, something I would relish doing in favor of a nakedly partisan thing, which would codify the fantasies of Fox News into United States code. Let's at least have a hearing before we do that. Let's at least present the evidence that we heard from Susan Rice, that we heard from Sam Power. Let's actually let people see how unmasking is done before we betray the expectations and responsibility that this essential committee has. So I don't have an amendment. I just have a lot of sadness, and I guess I'll just join in the ranking member's plea that let's engage. Let's do what our constituents expect us to do and have a conversation. Let's at least have a hearing. Let's take this seriously. I'll yield the remainder of my time to the ranking member.
I thank the gentleman. I would just say, because it's been suggested that my statement that there's not a scintilla of evidence that there was any improper unmasking under 702, I would ask any of my colleagues whether in closed session after this hearing they would be willing to sit down with me and show me any evidence under 702 of an improper unmasking. Okay? I will look forward to that.
Gentlemen, will yield. I'd be glad to have that discussion with you. And I think I think almost every other member on this side would be glad to have that discussion with you.
Okay. I think you'll be very surprised at how you may have been misled as to...
I assure you, I have not been misled. I assure you that I have seen the same things you have seen, and I can assure you that it is absolutely evidence of improper access, and that if it was reversed and the Bush administration had been accessing the Obama administration in the manner in which we have seen and had testimony, there would be outrage on your side. And also, the other thing that's interesting, this is just about providing oversight. That's all we're doing is oversight.
Reclaiming my time. Reclaiming my time. I yield back.
Mr. Himes, time's expired. Just for the record, for the audience to know that we have had countless hearings and meetings regarding 702. I know that there's not a day that goes by that me or my colleagues don't get phone calls from someone within the IC who's briefing us on the importance of this program. We have held, actually, for all the members of both Republicans and Democrats, with the heads of most of the agencies in a classified setting. And we've had an educational program put together for the Republicans to come to on our side. That, of course, you guys on the Democrat side were welcome to do that, and you can still continue to educate the rest of our colleagues because, as you all know, dealing with FISA is quite complicated. But at this time, I want to go to Mr. Rooney. Oh, and just a clarification, we will have time for amendments for those of you who want to offer amendments. But Mr. Rooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too am sad because, it's unfortunate that the ranking member of the subcommittee has brought up our relationship as far as what we've talked about privately as what our game plan or how we're going to move forward. And it's been very difficult and frustrating with everything else that's been going on in this committee. I agree with you over the last year with the investigation that we're engaged in now, but that I don't think has disrupted the fact that you and I have both seen the importance of reauthorizing this hugely important tool that keeps this country safe and how we're going to go about doing that. I got your letter. The reason I didn't respond is because I didn't feel a need to respond because I agreed with what you said in your letter. And we talked about, you said that we never talked about, we did talk about what was going to happen with 702 at some point in the future. We didn't really know when this day was going to be here. But my side, my job is to make sure that I educate the members on our side of the aisle, and your job, I think, is to educate the members on your side of the aisle while this program is important. We have, as the chairman said, have had countless meetings on our side to try to educate, which is, by the way, as you know, very difficult on my side of the aisle, to try to get everybody to agree that this tool is not sacrificing their civil liberties or their Fourth Amendment protections, that we're looking at people's emails or phone calls without a warrant or without Fourth Amendment protections, that what we're doing in this bill is within the constitutional yet balanced by the national security guidelines that they would expect, that our founding fathers would expect. That's not an easy chore on our side of the aisle. And so when you talk about our relationship and our communication or lack thereof, as you say, that does make me sad as well. But I will just say this, if trying to tighten the screws on unmasking, which is the one thing I think in this investigation that I thought that we are in agreement, there was a huge disparity on how people that were either in the administration, and I don't care what side of the aisle they were on, how some people were asking for names to be unmasked with literally, I want this name unmasked because I want it unmasked, versus other people that would give a full-page explanation as to why. And our attempt to make it more uniform and use more strict scrutiny as to how people would get a United States citizen's name unmasked, that we could possibly be having an argument on this committee, in this room, that trying to do a better job and make those screws tighter is somehow political, that somehow that's playing politics, that we're trying to make a political statement by doing a little bit better job to make sure there's uniformity within the administration on how United States citizens' names are unmasked. How that's political, I have no idea. But that just goes to show how this committee has devolved with something as simple as trying to get unmasking right, how you could potentially vote no on a bill that keeps this country safe because you think that we're playing politics with regard to unmasking in the last administration or transition period. Even if that's true, the next administration might be a Democrat. And guess what? It's still in place. So if you want it to be in place for a Democratic nominee and a Republican Congress, then you get those assurances too. All we're trying to do is tighten the screws to make sure that the language for people that are trying to unmask U.S. citizens' names in an intelligence report is done with the strictest scrutiny and has to be justified down to the last letter, that it's reasonable or justified, and how you can say that that's political and how you could vote no for that. I hope you sleep well at night on that one, because that is absurd. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Sewell.
Thank you. I yield my time to the ranking member.
I thank the gentlewoman for yielding. I think it's apparent from the comments of my colleagues, and I hope this is just a misunderstanding and not something more deliberate. The critique that you're making of unmasking, you have every right to make, but it's not about 702. All the comments you made have not been about this program, and I assume that you know that. I hope that you know that, and if you don't know that, when we sit down, Mr. Turner, my colleagues, you will find out that the concerns you're expressing are not...
Will the gentleman yield, since he's questioning my level of knowledge on the bill in front of us?
I would be happy to yield.
I look forward to us, as you said, when we're in our classified briefing, going through what you and I have both already read, which are testimonies where actually a couple of them that we were in attendance and both questioned the witnesses, where they related to us what I believe are absolute abuses by the Obama administration, where they did use the process of unmasking, I think, to the detriment of the rights of U.S. citizens. Now, this is a process that I believe needs to be addressed.
Reclaiming my time.
And by addressing it in this vehicle, we're protecting American citizens.
Are you talking about under Program 702, sir?
We are protecting American citizens in the bill that is in front of you on the issue and unmasking.
Then I guess your answer is no. We're not talking about 702. No, that's precisely my point. We are not talking about 702. The comments my colleague has just made,
as you are aware,
Mr. Rooney,
we are talking about
are not
702
to
and
this program. That's my point. Now, if you wish to nonetheless interfere with our progress on this issue of this program because of concerns about other things, then at least be open about what you're doing, okay? We happen to think this program is too important to be potentially dragged down by a debate over something else. But nonetheless, that is where we are.
Will the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield.
Mr. Schiff, you know that this is the vote that we have in front of us today. I understand what you're saying about the differences, but this is the vehicle by which we are going to make the reforms in the problems that we are faced with today. The reality of the situation on both sides of our aisle, forget about all the politics in Russia and all that. The reality is that this is the vehicle that's moving the reforms that we want to do. And that's true on your side of the aisle, and it's true on our side of the aisle. If we're going to get this passed,
reclaiming my time, then
we have to do this today.
Are we in agreement then, Mr. Rooney, that the concerns you're raising are not implicated by anything we've seen on 702? Are we in agreement then on that?
I am in agreement that today is the day that we have the chance to make the reforms, and if we miss this opportunity, then we are making the country
weaker. Then reclaiming my time, I assume we are therefore in agreement that the problems that you're talking about are not pertaining to this program, and we're merely using this vehicle. And my plea to you is, don't use 702. It's too important. If we want to have, if you want to have a standalone bill, you're in the majority. You can take it up anytime you want, and the Speaker can schedule it for the House floor anytime you want. It doesn't have to be with this program. And you know the IC is not in favor of this language in the bill. You know that. We know that. And yet you're insisting on it for a political reason unrelated to 702. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield to my colleague, Mr. Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. People watching this debate might arrive at an accurate conclusion, which is that there's a debate to be had over unmasking. I said that in my original statement. I've looked at every single unmasking, and I'll very much looking forward to the meeting with Mr. Turner, and I've been in every single hearing on this issue. There is a debate to be had, but this is not the vehicle, and it's not the vehicle because the number of hearings we have had on unmasking is 0. The number of meetings that we've had in a bipartisan way on unmasking is 0. The number of presentations that we've made to the American public on this issue is 0. We have lots of classified information. We have a difference of opinion. If we were responsible, we would come together, try to resolve this difference of opinion, as Mr. Turner and Mr. Schiff have attempted to do, and then we would share our conclusions with the people who sent us here. So no, this is not the vehicle. It is an important issue. You see the debate. Let's do this right. Let's not jam it through. With that, I yield back to the ranking member.
Okay, the gentleman's time has expired. Just for the record, this does not only the unmasking provision, it covers 702, but all of FISA, because unmaskings occur across all of FISA. So to try to bifurcate that is quite the interesting point, since we put in other provisions that have absolutely, I would say, even less to do with 702 into this bill, like some of the PCLOB provisions and other provisions. So is the gentleman wanting to pull some of those out also?
Will the gentleman yield?
I'll yield.
We did that, Mr. Chairman,
for a little while.
We had bipartisan agreement on that. We don't have bipartisan.
You can't make the argument. You can't make the argument that one thing applies to 702 because you want it to, but something that our side wants doesn't, Chairman, when it actually does.
Mr. Chairman, my point is, since this is not a problem with 702, and there's no bipartisan agreement on it, why insert it and bring the bill down on something that does not relate to 702?
Reclaiming my time, the bill's not going to go down. Mr. Stewart's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's interesting, this is an open hearing, and I think there's something that's apparent, and that is our Democratic colleagues feel badly about something that I feel badly about as well, and that is one of the things that I most appreciated about this committee was it was bipartisan. And I looked across the aisle, and some of you I've traveled with, and many of you have considered friends. It was bipartisan while we had a Democratic president. And now it's not bipartisan. And what changed? What changed was on November 20th. And I would argue the first week of November, everything changed. And suddenly this committee was not bipartisan, because we had a Republican nominee or a Republican president. And you're exactly right. This committee has changed because we have a Republican president now. And some of the things that I've heard some of you that I respected, and some of the accusations that you have made against private citizens, and the innuendo and the cloud you put over people with laughable evidence, and then come and complain about being bipartisan. The ranking member asked for evidence. He said there was no scintilla of evidence. I'll give you evidence right here, not in a closed session. I'll give you evidence right now. 300 times. More than 300 times. The ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, requested unmasking, which is astronomically higher than anything we saw before that. It's higher than National Security Advisor Rice. It's higher than the director of CIA, Brennan. Much, much higher. They had 70. She had hundreds and hundreds. And are you going to go say to the American people that that's okay? A political appointee in a political and a powerful position takes American citizens who are not under investigation. They're private citizens. They've been accused of no wrongdoing. And this political appointee demands that those citizens' identities be not only unmasked, but in far too many cases, their identities were released and leaked to the press. And you think that's okay? And you're going to go tell the American people we're okay with that? Because I think if you're going to make that political argument, good luck with that. The American people demand and expect, and they deserve their identity and their privacy to be protected. That's the only thing we're trying to do here. And if you think that's partisan, I don't know what to say to you. Because it seems to me that's something that Republicans and Democrats could agree on. If you are not under investigation, you deserve and have a right to privacy. And if you would vote against this bill because you want to go to the American people and say, we don't want to assure you of that, or we're going to make it harder for you to have that privacy, once again, good luck with that. Because I think it's a nutty political argument to make. With that, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Any member wish to be heard before we offer amendments? Move on to amendments. Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, as well. You know, since becoming a member of this committee, I've seen exactly why our overseas surveillance programs are so critically important. We need the ability to target and track individuals who we have reason to suspect are plotting against the United States. My time on this committee has illustrated clearly just how valuable it is to be able to quickly collect, store, and analyze intel on overseas suspects. It has and will continue to save lives. So, I support Section 702 and believe strongly that it should be reauthorized before it expires later this year. All of that being said, I have concerns that this bill has not gone far enough to narrow the authorities in Section 702 of FISA. We need to go further to address many of the civil liberties concerns raised since our last reauthorization of 702. We should be stronger on abouts collections and ensure that the NSA can only turn this collection back with the approval of Congress. There is enough ambiguity about abouts collection that the decision to turn its back on needs to be heavily debated. The bill also lacks a strict warrant requirement in order for the FBI to search the 702 database for information on specific Americans and to be utilized in criminal proceedings. I am aware that each and every year the program is approved, it must be found consistent with the Fourth Amendment by the Attorney General and Director of National Intelligence, which it has already been. However, having worn a law enforcement uniform, I think that the way we gather and are able to use evidence is critically important. I think that there are additional protections which we should implement in this program when we are dealing with the information of U.S. persons. Now, to be clear, I'm not soft on terrorism. I believe that robust intelligence collection is critical to our national security and that our intel officials need all possible tools to do their jobs well. But sitting on this very esteemed committee has shown me that we collectively could address these provisions. We could and should protect the Fourth Amendment rights of Americans in a stronger and more forceful way. So, as the bill is currently drafted, and particularly with the politically motivated unmasking language, I oppose this bill. I hope that we can work with our colleagues on the House Judiciary and in the Senate to reauthorize and reform this authority in a very thoughtful way before it expires. Thank you. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Carson. Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have worked for, I guess, the better part of the last 9 months with my friend from Connecticut. He is always prepared. He is thorough. He is every bit as effective as a questioner in private as he is in public. But I would tell my friend from Connecticut, there were Republicans who told President Trump that he was wrong when he accused President Obama of wiretapping Trump Tower. There were Republicans who said it contemporaneous with the claim So I would just ask my friend from Connecticut, no matter how heated the political debate may get, don't ever lose sight of that fairness and don't lump everyone together. There were Republicans who said there is no evidence to support that, and if there is, produce it immediately. To my friend from California, I would say you are correct. You are correct. We have spent the better part of the last 9 months looking at issues unrelated with this precise reauthorization. But my friend from California is also experienced and bright enough to know that if the problems can manifest themselves in one surveillance program, they can certainly manifest themselves in another, because it's the same techniques, it's the same principles, it's the same players. So why would we wait until similar problems manifest themselves? Why not fix it before it happens? The issues, the word illegal was used in connection with unmasking. There's no illegal unmaskings. They may violate policy, they may be improper. It's not against the law to do it. But we've both been in the room, all three of us have been in the room, when principals with almost precisely the same job description had wildly disparate unmasking numbers. That doesn't mean a crime was committed. It doesn't even mean the motive was nefarious. What it does mean is there are different policies and paradigms being applied to the request to unmask. And what was most troubling to me, and I know it was to my two friends on the other side of the aisle, is in some instances the principal himself or herself was not even aware that the unmasking request had been made. That's not what we want. If we're going to trust a national security advisor, we're going to trust an attorney general with the power to unmask a fellow citizen's name, at least make sure it is the principal doing it. And we were all there. And we were all, I think, surprised at the testimony. So my question to my friends would be this: why wait until similar problems manifest themselves? This president, unless he is going to mirror Grover Cleveland, is never going to go back through another transition. Unless we have another non-successive presidency, he's not going to go back through transition. So this has nothing to do with President Trump. He's not going to go back through it. It has to do with the next Democrat administration, the next Republican one. And more than that, it has to do, it wasn't 10 months ago, we sat in this room with Admiral Rogers and Director Comey, and we put them on notice that this agreement, this tacit agreement that we have between government and the American people, that we're going to empower you, but you have to be good stewards of that power. And we put them on notice that there were issues. And here we are in December, 8 months later, discussing those very issues. And if they have taken steps to resolve them, those steps have been lost on me. So it is our responsibility to do it. And yes, I will yield to my friend from California. But what I would ask him is, why would we wait until similar issues manifest themselves in this surveillance program?
And I would ask my colleague, why did you wait? You're in the majority. You could have introduced an unmasking bill. You could have taken it up at any time. Why wait until this program is about to sunset and try to jam it in the bill if you think this is such a good and important idea? And I'll tell you the answer: because this is a political messaging tool that, if it were in a standalone bill, would not get bipartisan support, but by putting it in a must-pass program.
This is the first reauthorization that I have participated in since I've been on HPSI. As my friend from California knows, this is my first time on HPSI. So you're welcome to query my colleagues as to why they haven't done it in the past, but this is my first opportunity to do it. So I'm not a Johnny-come-lately to it. I was talking about it to Comey and Rogers, having been on this committee for a month. So you can query my colleagues, but you and I both know this is the first time I've been through a reauthorization on this program.
And I'm not questioning my colleagues' good faith here. I'm just saying, if this was as pressing an issue as my colleagues in the majority make out, there was nothing preventing them over the last 6 months from introducing a bill on the subject. But by putting it in a must-pass bill, a must-pass program, the effort is to shoehorn bipartisan support for a partisan narrative, and that is simply not what this should be used for.
Time has expired. Anybody wish to be heard over here before we get to amendments? Ms. Spear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You know, I must say that I really value every member of this committee. And I do think we're all people of goodwill. And I think this dialogue we're having right now would be really constructive if we could talk about it separate from 702. Because Mr. Gowdy is making some good points. There's many things that I think we could come to an agreement on. But I do worry that, separate and distinct from that, we have not fully dealt with this measure in a manner that is consistent with what the American people would want. Since 2012, there have been a significant number of Americans who've been improperly swept up in surveillance activities that the law says must not target Americans, and that this information is retained for years. This improperly obtained information has been used in court against Americans charged with crimes that have nothing to do with national security, with no warrants and without the required notification to the defense. Leaving aside the unmasking language also included in the bill, civil liberty groups have assessed that the so-called fixes in this bill would be worse than no fixes at all. There is no reason for this to be the case. There have been numerous other FISA reauthorization bills introduced in both chambers of Congress, many of which contain elements with merit that should receive debate on the floor. This is far too serious of a matter to ram a renewal of these authorities through on a ridiculously short timeline. This bill was shared with my office less than 24 hours ago. And here we are, marking up legislation that has incredibly profound constitutional implications for all Americans, and business implications, I might add. My concerns are shared widely by both sides of the aisle, and there's no reason that we can't work together to fix these problems. We could be sitting here thoughtfully debating the precarious balance between security and civil liberties and the best path forward, but instead, the majority has decided to do otherwise. Waiting until the authorities are about to expire and then jamming this bill through committee with no time for debate and discussion is the very definition of undemocratic, and it's disrespectful to all Americans and to the Constitution. I do believe the Section 702 authorities are critical to our national security, and there is a true balance to be struck here. We are all here because we love our country, and we are all driven to protect it, both for external national security threats and from internal weakening of our constitutional protections. This bill fails to balance those concerns, and so I must oppose it. I would like to yield the rest of my time to Mr. Himes.
Thank you, Ms. Spear, and I just want to honor Congressman Gowdy's observations. I agree with them wholeheartedly. He's right. There have been Republicans who have taken risks to acknowledge what you said about the tweet. And this is not fundamentally, I think, a partisan thing and shouldn't fundamentally be a partisan thing. And I want to reassure Mr. Rooney, though I'm unhappy with the process that has led us here today, and though we've had some heated words, I think the personal relationships on this committee are really important. I really want to distill the issue down to 2 points, though. Number one, and I think these are sort of unarguable, we all know what we do, and we all know that there are certain issues that are political dynamite. There just are. Unmasking is one of them. Benghazi is one of them. The possibility of collusion is one of them. And every time one of these items of political dynamite get put out there, MSNBC does what it does, Fox does what it does. We try our best, usually, to be staid and careful in talking about these issues, but they're political dynamite. We know that. My problem is we know that, and we're moving forward on a change to United States code on an issue that we all know is political dynamite without educating the American people one bit. Look, I'm open-minded. I think I've seen as much of the evidence as anybody up here. I'm open-minded. I'm not closed-minded to the possibility that there were improper unmaskings, but I'm not ready to jump to a conclusion because we haven't had the conversation. We haven't had that hearing, publicly or privately, and we've got disagreements. If we're disagreeing, how are we going to try to reduce the temperature on this issue of political dynamite for the American people? So my plea is not that Republicans be better or anything else. My plea is simply that we know this issue is political dynamite. Let's deal with it, but let's deal with it in a way that does justice to what we should be doing for the American people. Yield back.
Mr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all know that the 702 tool is subject to unmasking. And if this foreign intelligence tool has the potential to be abused, I feel it's up to us to protect that and to provide oversight. And in some ways stating that you want to restrict the oversight, I think it tells the American people that maybe we shouldn't be trusted. Why would we want to restrict our oversight as representatives of the people over a tool that we are supposed to have oversight on? Let's not wait any longer. Why wait any longer? Let's let the American people know that we intend to provide oversight and make sure that they are protected and that we are doing things right. It's just one more opportunity for us on a very important committee to do what they used to say on Superman: fight for truth, justice, and the American way. And I yield back.
Anyone else want to be heard before we get to amendments? Mr. Swalwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we debate this here today, our enemies are toiling away abroad, plotting to carry out what could be the next attack against our allies, or, God forbid, here in the United States. And our constituents at home are counting on us to do all we can to ensure that as we seek to prevent the next attack, understand the next attack, thwart the next attack, that we also respect their civil liberties. And what a message it would send to them if this committee could produce a bipartisan piece of legislation. And I think you've heard today that there's a commitment from all of the Democrats that if the unmasking part of this legislation is taken out, you will have a unanimous 702 reauthorization that would show our enemies a resolve to understand what they're doing and to fight it, and the American people a resolve to respect their civil liberties and their God-given right to privacy. I implore my colleagues across the aisle, pull the unmasking piece. Let's have a conversation about it. Mr. Schiff, in public and in private, has pleaded for us to just sit down in an informal manner and talk about the Russia investigation, to talk about the unmasking concerns, and it's fallen on deaf ears. The invitation has never been taken up. I think so much can be accomplished, and so much has been accomplished when we just talk informally. Mr. Stewart mentioned the foreign travel that we've done. We've gone to some of the roughest places in the world, and some of the tightest bonds among us have been made. And I think we can do that again, but let's informally meet and address these concerns. And then let's have a hearing on improper unmasking. And then if there's a standalone bill to be had to address some of the concerns that Mr. Gowdy has and that Mr. Himes have brought up, I think we could probably find bipartisan support for that. But to our enemies and to the people at home who are counting on us to produce a bipartisan bill today, they're not going to get that. They're going to get a partisan bill that addresses claims that have not yet been proven. And it's going to be just one more setback that we've seen, ironically, that started back on March 20th in this room, which I would submit was the day that the wheels came off the bipartisan spirit that this committee has always shown. So I hope my colleagues will poll this part of the legislation and allow us to show the American people that we're united in fighting the threats that we face and protecting the civil liberties that we depend upon. And I yield back.
On the Republican side, Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Chairman.
I'm sorry. I skipped Mr. Turner. Mr. Turner.
I'm just going to speak briefly. The partisan tone that you're hearing is the partisan characterization of this bill by the Democrats on this committee. There's not one partisan word in this bill. There's no word Donald Trump. There's no word Obama administration. There's no word Trump Tower. In fact, if you read this bill, which is the only reason why I asked for time, is to make the clarity of the issue of what we're debating, it's an issue merely of oversight. There's no prohibition that is included in this bill. There is no restriction that is included in this bill. There is an issue of oversight. Open government and our responsibility in our role of oversight is essential to the functions of this committee. When you argue against these provisions, you're merely arguing against oversight. When you make it partisan, you make it partisan. There's not one word in this bill that's partisan. It applies to Democrats, it applies to Republicans, and it applies basically to the obligation of oversight. And what is that oversight? Of protecting American citizens' constitutional rights. You can't have something more important in this committee than that. To take it down to the Trump Tower when the word Trump Tower doesn't exist in this bill is just absolutely to cast aside our obligations constitutionally to protect American citizens, to make this partisan. And then, when you turn to members of this committee and personally attack them, you are the ones who are destroying the bipartisan aspects. Now, there hasn't been one person on this side who's pointed one finger over there except to respond to the attacks of partisanship on the other side. Let's get back to our job. Read the bill, look at its oversight provisions, understand that it protects Americans, that it would protect the operations of our government, and that it would strengthen the functions of this committee. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Castro.
Thank you. Regarding this bill, I still have concerns about the privacy issue, about the inclusion of the unmasking language, and about the which we've had to consider this legislation. So I'm going to vote no. I yield back.
Any other Republican who wishes to be heard before we get to amendments? Mr. Heck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for having this open committee hearing. Coming up out of the skiff is a delightful change from our past practice. They say sunshine is the best disinfectant. I think we're getting a bit of a ray of sunshine here today. I also want to add my voice of appreciation to the staff on both sides. I know that there was a fairly furious run-up to today and a lot of effort expended, and even though we clearly did not get there finally, it wasn't for failure of a lot of effort on a lot of people's parts. I'm going to vote no today, but not for most of the reasons that have been expressed today. People have suggested that they're going to vote no because of the process and the fairly short timeline, 36 hours to examine this bill. I share that concern. As a matter of fact, I think there are questions that we have not had time to actually explore and fully understand, such as the expansion of the scope of collection to include civilian groups not associated with terrorist organizations or state actors that is found in Section 102. That's new language, and it's expansive, and I don't understand who it's aimed at, and is it appropriately scoped. I don't understand how it interacts, for example, with the EU Privacy Shield. New questions kept popping up about this yesterday and even into the night. I also don't think we had enough time to understand how this bill defines malicious cyber activities. It gives a different definition than that which was included in the CFIUS bill that was introduced just 2 weeks ago. The chair was a sponsor, I was a co-sponsor, and I'm not sure why it is that these differ in that definition and how that interrelationship might be of importance or not. But these, at the end of the day, these are not the reasons I'm voting no. They are concerns. I share the concerns that there has been a devolution of bipartisanship here and is fully on display here today. Don't think we're actually moving the chains down the field by accusing one another of partisanship in any way. But again, that's not the reason I'm voting no. There have been concerns expressed here today about inclusion of the unmasking part. I think for the first time in my 11 months of grateful service on this committee, I must disagree with my dear friend from California, Mr. Swalwell, you could take this out and I'd still vote no, because I have other concerns, as a matter of fact. Indeed, I think the questions about unmasking are fair and that we need to explore some of this as we go forward. No, I'm voting no because I believe that this bill sets up a false choice between whether or not we can be secure or whether or not we can protect our rights to privacy, especially under the Fourth Amendment. Benjamin Franklin famously quipped, and I'm amazed that he has not yet been quoted today, that those who would trade privacy for security deserve neither. And I find that the weight of this bill trades off privacy for security, and I believe that that is a false choice because I believe we can have both. We have the issue of about collection, which was never envisioned by this committee, and it was never specifically authorized, yet the text of this bill implicitly approves about collection. And I find that unacceptable without continuing work on our part to address about collection in a clear way that leaves no ambiguity for what can and cannot be collected about us. That's the Fourth Amendment protection and right to privacy that I think is not upheld sufficiently in this legislation. We have the issue of U.S. persons' queries that has been referred to. This does not close the door on U.S. persons' queries. It merely oils the hinges. But we do have constitutional rights. We do include among them the Fourth Amendment to be secure in our houses and papers and effects. And we need to close the backdoor search loophole and lock the door. So at the end of the day, I'm voting no, not because of the process, although concerned, or the timeline, although concerned, or the lack of bipartisanship, although concerned, or the inappropriate inclusion, in my humble opinion, of the unmasking provision in the 702. I'm voting no because I do not think we have struck the right balance and secured both our privacy and our security, and I believe we can achieve both, but not in this legislation. And with that, I yield back, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. We are ready to start the amendment process, and I have an amendment. I offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, offered by Mr. Nunes of California.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. Can you disperse the amendment? Oh, everyone. Okay, everyone should have it's at the desk. Okay. It's in tab 2. The amendment in nature of a substitute, a copy of which is in the binder before you, incorporates the changes made since the bill was introduced. Most of the changes are minor and technical in nature and have been signed off on by the D&I, and I appreciate their quick turnaround on that. But furthermore, I want to point out that in this amendment, we have 3 bipartisan provisions, all of which ironically are not directly related to 702, but we felt it was important to listen to our friends on the other side of the aisle and incorporate these into the bill. The first is a requirement that the Department of Justice brief the Congressional Judiciary and Intelligence Committees on their interception of derived from and used interpretation of derived from and used in FISA. Second, a reporting requirement for the Attorney General and the Director of National Intelligence to outline to Congress current and future challenges to the effectiveness of foreign intelligence surveillance activities under FISA. And the third provision put in is the whistleblower protections for contractors. Do any other members wish to be heard on this amendment? Seeing none, no further members wish to be heard. The previous question is ordered. The question is on the amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. No recorded vote? Okay. Do any members wish to be heard, recognized for an amendment? Mr. Schiff has an amendment at the desk. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, offered by Mr. Schiff of California.
Without objection, the amendment shall be considered as read. I now recognize Mr. Schiff to speak on his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, members, this amendment is in the nature of a substitute to the manager's amendment. It is the text of the bill without the unmasking provisions. And I would offer this as a last-ditch effort to see if there's some accommodation we can reach to keep this process moving forward. There are a couple options that we have here. We can have a party line vote today, and when I said the bill will go nowhere, that's where we'll go. It will, yes, pass out of committee, but it won't go anywhere beyond that. We could do a couple things. We can adopt this amendment in the nature of substitute, and at the same time we take up this bill on the floor, take up a standalone bill on unmasking. That would give members the ability to vote no or yes on the unmasking language, and it would give us all the ability to vote yes in favor of a reauthorization of 702. In which case the work product of the committee would be much more likely to go forward. The other alternative, which we would once again offer to my colleagues, but my colleagues may not have all been aware of the offer, we don't think unmasking language belongs in this bill at all, as we've made clear. But we did express a willingness in the interest of compromise to adopt the unmasking language that the Judiciary Committee put out. We are still willing to do that. If the majority is, that would maintain the bipartisan character of the bill. And if there's interest in exploring that, we can recess briefly and we can take that up as an amendment. So I do want to make sure that all the members are aware that we have offered that as a way of compromise, and see if there's any interest in that. And if there is, I'd be happy to yield to any of my colleagues.
Is the gentleman yielding back this time?
No, I was making the offer to my colleagues if there was interest in adopting the Judiciary Committee language as a compromise, that we might move forward. And seeing none, in that case, I will offer this amendment in the nature of a substitute, which would preserve a bipartisan work product of the committee and give us a chance of having a role in the final shape of this legislation. Otherwise, I think we're simply going to abdicate to the Senate. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would urge an aye vote on the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
The gentleman's time has expired. Does anybody else wish to be heard on the amendment? Mr. Conaway.
Just briefly, the way I understand the gentleman's amendment, that he would strike, among other things, Section 207 of the amendment, which puts in Section 512 to the underlying base document, which is titled Procedures Regarding Dissemination of Non-Publicly Available Information Concerning U.S. Persons. The base of this section basically gives Americans protections, their identity protections. It sets up the requirements by which someone within the administration has to go through, the hoops they have to go through in order to unmask a U.S. citizen's name to be used within the intelligence community. As you look through here, the originating element documents, the originating element, i.e. the entity, documents in writing each covered request for the document, giving the name and title of the person asking for the request, the reasons why, and we'll go through the just good governance, and sets up the oversight. So as I understand the gentleman's amendment, it would strike all of those protections for U.S. citizens that whatever time frame that we're doing this in, however it does. Nevertheless, if we put this in law, those good governance oversight protections would be struck under your amendment. Is that the understanding?
Ms. Conaway, the amendment in the nature of substitute strikes the problematic unmasking language.
Okay, so I'll take that as a yes, that in fact, all of the protections, however quickly they came together, whatever time frame should have done, I got all that. But today, we have the opportunity to put these in place, and the gentleman's amendment strikes that, and for that, I will oppose the gentleman's amendment. I'll yield back.
Does anyone else wish to be heard on Mr. Schiff's amendment? All right, seeing no further members wish to be heard, without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the amendment. Those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill? Seeing none, the question is now on adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 4478 as amended to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that, I request a recorded vote.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered, and the clerk will call the roll.
Chairman Nunes.
Aye.
Chairman Nunes, aye. Mr. Conaway.
Aye.
Mr. Conaway, aye. Mr. King.
Aye.
Mr. King, aye. Mr. Lobiondo.
Aye.
Mr. Lobiondo, aye. Mr. Rooney. Mr. Rooney, aye. Miss Ross Layton.
Aye.
Miss Ross Layton, aye. Mr. Turner. Aye. Mr. Turner, aye. Dr. Wenstrup. Aye. Dr. Wenstrup, aye. Mr. Stewart. Aye. Mr. Stewart, aye. Mr. Crawford. Aye. Mr. Crawford, aye. Mr. Gowdy. Mr. Gowdy, aye. Ms. Stefanik. Aye. Ms. Stefanik, aye. Mr. Hurd. Aye. Mr. Hurd, aye. Ranking Member Schiff.
No.
Ranking Member Schiff, no. Mr. Himes. No. Mr. Himes, no. Ms. Sewell. No. Ms. Sewell, no. Mr. Carson. No. Mr. Carson, no. Ms. Spear. No. Ms. Spear, no. Mr. Quigley. Mr. Swalwell.
No.
Mr. Swalwell, no. Mr. Castro.
No.
Mr. Castro, no. Mr. Heck. No. Mr. Heck, no. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 ayes and 8 noes.
Thank you. The bill will be purported to the floor of the House of Representatives. Without objection, pursuant to Clause 2L of House Rule 11, members will have 2 days to submit views on the bills considered today. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be allowed to make necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill reported today, subject to the approval of the minority. Hearing no objection, so ordered. If there is no further business without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Jack.